Today I'd like to talk about thinking. Thinking's an interesting and very important topic because it makes up such a large amount of our lives. Basically, we're thinking all of the time, and so that means we create a world for ourselves that is made up of our thinking. So that the thinking itself creates an environment. So the environment we live in is the environment of our thoughts rather than the natural environment, which is made up of what we're supposedly thinking about, or what we think we're thinking about. And in some cases, our thoughts do have a tangible, solid reality, rather than just being mere ideas in our head. So like David Bohm says, everything we create out of our thinking, which means that everything we create in a non-artistic, non-creative way, everything that we design or engineer comes out of our thinking, and because it comes out of our thinking, it is our thinking made concrete. And because we have got so very good at making things and making our own environment, this means that even more than ever, we're living within the system of thought. So going back many hundreds of years before we were so good at making environments for ourselves, that before we actually overlaid the natural world with the world of our physical construct, we were still living in the world of our thinking. But now we're living in a world of our thinking, and we're also living in an environment that is made up of our concretized thoughts. So we're even further away from reality. And the difference between the real world or reality and our thoughts, or our designed construct, is that anything we think and anything we make on the basis of these constructs has a very literal existence. So if I make a toaster, not that I know how to make a toaster, but if we make a toaster, then that is a toaster. It is what it says on the label. It does the job that it's supposed to do and nothing else. So we can't say that the toaster is multivalent in the sense that it could be lots of things or mean lots of things. We can't say that it's a metaphor, really, even though we could make it into a metaphor if we wanted to. But we don't generally want to. Usually we might make toast in a toaster, but we don't want to make the toast into some kind of metaphor. Most of us wish to use the designed environment in the way in which it is designed to be used. And this includes the virtual environment that is created by social media and the internet in general. So that's another example of the same thing, even though it's not concrete or material. It comes out of our thinking, and it has a literal existence. It is what it is, and that's all it is. And literal truths can be very useful, and there's many circumstances in which if someone is telling us something, we want them to tell us in a literal way. i.e. there's a bunch of people in the process of letting the air out of your tyres, or you better move quick because there's a flash flood coming. Or maybe less dramatic examples of that, but other examples of things where we just need to know something literally. To go into metaphors, if there's something like that happening, really isn't helpful. So we could say there's a place for multivalent or metaphorical elements of the environment, and there's a place for concrete, literal elements. But the key thing to understand, really, and I don't think we're very good at understanding it, as far as I know we're not very good at understanding it, is that we have created pretty much a total literal environment for ourselves, wall to wall. And there's pretty much no space in it at all for the metaphorical or the ambiguous or the non-definite. And we're so excited by doing this, so excited by creating the concrete environment, the mind-created environment, that we've run away with ourselves. We're going to town. And we haven't yet discovered that there's a problem with doing this. And the problem is, of course, that the literal environment, the concrete environment, is so very limited. For example, if you'll go down to the bowling alley and buy tickets and have a game of bowls and maybe have a cup of coffee or something to eat, that's a great time. We can say we're having a great time, maybe. But the point is that is a designed environment, and there's only one thing we can really do there, so we can only put that environment to the one use. It's very limited. So that's not really good for us. It's very hard to creatively interpret that environment, and it's very hard to behave in that environment in any other way than the way we are supposed to behave or programmed to behave. So what that means is the designed environment is defining us. It's defining what we do, and it's also defining the way we're thinking. And maybe not so obviously, it's also defining the way we think about ourselves, understand ourselves, and perceive ourselves. So this is a really weird thing. We design the designed environment, which is pretty much a whole world for a lot of us. Then that designed environment, which we have created, reaches back and defines us. It defines our behavior, of course, defines our thinking, that also follows on, and it defines our way of thinking and understanding ourselves, which means that it reaches out and it defines us, who we understand ourselves to be. And we're very susceptible to being defined in that way. It's one of the key things about being a human being, is that we're so very susceptible to thinking we are what we've been told we are. We're gullible in that way, which Chogyam Trungpa says somewhere. But essentially we're little blobs of gullible energy, just waiting to be imprinted, just waiting to be told what's real and what isn't real, and then we don't even realize that we've been told anything, or that we have gone along with any particular version of reality that has been imprinted on us. So we could say that the natural world, because it isn't being designed out of our thinking to suit very specific concrete purposes, doesn't define us in this way. When we exist largely in the undesigned world, and people could possibly say, well, nature is the designer of the natural world, but there is no designer. Nature doesn't work like that. Nature explores possibilities in a much more chaotic and creative way. And although it's possible to say there is design there, it's not like a man-made designed environment. It reflects back many, many more possibilities at us than the designed environment does, which always pins us down with just the one identity. So going along with this suggestion, we can say that we've been a bit too clever for our own good, and we've created this total designed environment, and then we're in it, and that designed environment defines us, and we believe ourselves to be who this or what this defined environment is telling us we are. And at that point we don't look for anything else, because as soon as we're identified with a particular concrete idea of ourselves, we certainly don't look anymore at who we take ourselves to be, but instead we look at what's around us in terms of how we can best act out what we understand ourselves to be, or exploit the world in terms of what we understand ourselves to be. So all our money goes on controlling and manipulating in accordance with this very limited view of ourselves. Now, as long as we're wedded to this very limited view of ourselves, which is just as literal and limited as the world we've created around ourselves, we're never going to be well in ourselves. We're never going to be happy or feel okay on any deep level. We might feel okay on a very superficial level from time to time. Get a kind of rush of euphoria from this and a rush of euphoria from that. But we aren't going to feel okay on a deep level. And feeling okay on a deep level, which doesn't necessarily mean we're having a jolly time, but more that we're connected to something real, something that isn't a fantasy, can be equated to mental health. So in order to be mentally healthy, we have to be more than society is telling us we are, and more than the designed environment is telling us we are. And yet that's a problem, because as soon as we do start being anything different from what society or the defined world or the system of thought tells us we are, we're in trouble, because we can be identified by that system of immunological response as being alien to the system, intruders, not quite right, misfits, weird in some way. So we might get picked on, or we'll get dismissed or sidelined. We won't get taken seriously. And even on a less dramatic level than that, we can say that we're not going to do well. We're not going to be able to play the game in the same way that everyone else can. So we can't take part in society in the same way. So we're not going to do well, really. We might find it hard to get a job or attract a mate, find friends to hang around with. We're in misfit territory. And so the whole world that we're in is kind of punishing us for daring to believe that we are more than what it tells us we are. So from our point of view, some process might be going on within us, which is forcing us to acknowledge in some way that we are more than we've been told or led to understand we are. And this process is very often painful. And then the environment is going to punish us for manifesting something different from what everyone else is manifesting. We're manifesting something extra. There's new possibilities coming into play. And according to the system, or to the designed environment, this difference merely equals error. And it has to be stamped out, it has to be eliminated so we can come back to the equilibrium values. We can come back to what's considered right and proper. And that's the false idea of mental health. The false idea of mental health being what is mentally healthy for the system, which is itself not healthy. And it stands to reason that we can't ever be healthy when living in a defined environment or designed environment. Because just as anything which is defined is limited, so too are we limited. And the very word healthy comes from hail, which comes from the Old English word hale or whole. It comes from the word meaning whole anyway. To be healthy is to be the whole of who we are, and not some kind of splinter or not some kind of distorted version of that. But when we're a distorted or splintered version of the whole of ourselves, and we're living in a system where everyone else is too, then that poor version becomes the standard of what is mentally healthy. And therefore, the natural process which will actually bring us towards wholeness is thwarted at every step. And not only is it thwarted in terms of relationships and how people react to us or relate to us, and whether they think we're a bit weird or whether we don't get the job we're looking for or whatever it is. It also gets to work on us in a very business-like way in terms of therapy. Within a rational world, therapy is always directed to bring us towards something which is limited, because rationality only understands limited things or defined things. So we're mad about goals in mental health. We rave about them, we go on about making goals, and apparently if we can come up with a goal and work towards it, that's really mentally healthy. We kind of got this bizarre belief that mental health is all to do with having goals and attaining them, goal setting. And again, in some limited way, it's healthy enough to have goals and move out of maybe a kind of personal chaos and get things sorted according to the way which will be helpful to us. But in the bigger picture of things, we need to understand that a goal is something that comes out of our thinking. Of course, a goal is just another thought. A goal is defined. And if I'm putting all my money on moving towards a goal, that goal is defining me. And it's limiting me. A goal is always limited. And what the hell do you do when you get it? Go for another goal, go for another limited thing, another limitation. So growth isn't the obtaining of goals, growth is a movement beyond all the goals that used to be meaningful to us. Growth takes us beyond goals. Goals were only ever meaningful in terms of this limited idea that I had of myself. When I become more whole and less of a splinter, the goals that that splinter used to have don't mean a damn thing. They just are the reflections of that very same splinter. So when we're identified with the rational ego, our goals are the rational ego. So really we're just obsessing over ourselves and trying to perpetuate ourselves. And we're on a journey towards ourselves, and only the self we're on a journey towards never was who we were anyway. And if we want to move beyond this perennial obsession with the self that we're not, all the goal setting in the world isn't going to help us. What's going to help us is to move beyond everything we think we know about ourselves and we think we know about the world. So there's this movement of growth that's taking place, and that's what's going to help us. But that's not so easy to figure out how to use that bit of information, really. How do I grow? And obviously there's no formula for that, because a formula is always a rationally defined sequence of steps which leads towards a known goal. So straight away all of our methods and all of our formulae and all these little things that we love so much, like how to do this, or here's a handy way to do that, or there's a handy way to do that, or the 7 steps to this, or the 10 steps to this, or the 6 habits of successful people, etc., etc., are revealed for the utter nonsense that they are. Listening to other people going on like this, or reading their books or attending their seminars, is never going to help us grow. Because growing isn't a generic thing, it's not a one-size-fits-all type thing. So what we can say is that when we are living on the basis of a rational construct, when we have identified with this rational ego, there is a process of dissatisfaction that is part of that process of suffering, really. It is suffering to think we are this self that we're not. And there's no cure for that suffering. Not for that self, who we think we are, but which we aren't. And that's only right, because that suffering is the key to our growth. That suffering is the door which is just starting to swing open a bit, or maybe more than a bit, and that we can step through. And so what this way of looking at things means is that although we're suffering, we also value our suffering. We value it because it's the door to moving beyond ourselves or who we thought we were. Okay, thanks for watching.